Chapter 7. And Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished all his house. For he built the house of the forest of Lebanon. The length thereof was 100 cubits, and the breadth thereof 50 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits, upon 4 rows of cedar pillars, with cedar beams upon the pillars. And it was covered with cedar above upon the side chambers that lay on 45 pillars, 15 in a row. And there were beams in 3 rows, and light was over against light in 3 ranks. And all the doors with their posts were square in the frame, and light was over against light in 3 ranks. And he made the porch of pillars. The length thereof was 50 cubits, and the breadth thereof was 30 cubits, and a porch before them, and pillars and thick beams before them. And he made the porch of the throne where he might judge, even the porch of judgment. And it was covered with cedar from floor to floor. And his house where he might dwell in the other court within the porch was of the like work. He made also a house for Pharaoh's daughter, whom Solomon had taken to wife, like unto this porch. And all these were costly stones, according to the measure of hewn stones, sawed with saws within and without, even from the foundation unto the coping, and so the outside unto the great court. And the foundation was of costly stones, even great stones, stones of 10 cubits, and stones of 8 cubits. And above were costly stones, after the measure of hewn stones, and cedar work. And the great court round about had 3 rows of hewn stone, and a row of cedar beams, like as the inner court of the house of the Lord, and the court of the porch of the house. And King Solomon sent and fetched Hiram out of Tyre, and he was the son of a widow of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in brass, and he was filled with wisdom and understanding and skill to work all the works in brass. And he came to King Solomon, and wrought all his work. Thus he fashioned the 2 pillars of brass of 18 cubits high each, and a line of 12 cubits did compass it round about, and so the other pillar. And he made 2 capitals of molten brass to set upon the tops of the pillars. The height of the one capital was 5 cubits, and the height of the other capital was 5 cubits. And he also made nets of checker work, and wreaths of chain work for the capitals which were upon the top of the pillars, 7 for the one capital, and 7 for the other capital. And he made the pillars, and there were 2 rows round about upon the one network, to cover the capitals that were upon the top of the pomegranates, and so did he for the other capital. And the capitals that were upon the top of the pillars in the porch were of lily work 4 cubits. And there were capitals above also upon the 2 pillars, close by the belly, which was beside the network, and the pomegranates were 200 in rows round about upon each capital. And he set up the pillars at the porch of the temple, and he set up the right pillar, and called the name thereof Yachin, and he set up the left pillar, and called the name thereof Boaz. And upon the top of the pillars were lily work, so was the work of the pillars finished. And he made the molten sea of 10 cubits, from brim to brim, round in compass, and the height thereof was 5 cubits, and the line of 30 cubits did compass it round about. And under the brim of it round about there were knops, which did compass it for 10 cubits, compassing the sea round about. The knops were in 2 rows, cast when it was cast. It stood upon 12 oxen, 3 looking toward the north, and 3 looking toward the west, and 3 looking toward the south, and 3 looking toward the east. And the sea was set upon them above, and all their hinder parts were inward. And it was a hand's breadth thick, and the brim thereof was wrought like the brim of a cup, like the flower of a lily. It held 2,000 baths. And he made the 10 bases of brass. 4 cubits was the length of one base, and 4 cubits was the breadth thereof, and 3 cubits the height of it. And the work of the bases was on this manner. They had borders, and they were borders between the stays. And on the borders that were between the stays were lions and oxen and cherubim. And upon the stays it was like manner above, and beneath the lions and oxen were wreaths of hanging work. And every base had 4 brazen wheels, and axles of brass, and the 4 feet thereof had undersetters beneath the laver, where the undersetters molten, with wreaths at the side of each. And the mouth of it within the crown and above was a cubit high, and the mouth thereof was round after the work of a pedestal, a cubit and a half. And also upon the mouth of it were gravings, and their borders were 4 square, not round. And the 4 wheels were underneath the borders, and the axle trees of the wheels were in the base, and the height of the wheel was a cubit and a half, a cubit. And the work of the wheels was like the work of a chariot wheel, their axle trees, and their felloes, and their spokes, and their naves were all molten. And there were 4 undersetters at the 4 corners of each base. The undersetters thereof were of one piece with the base itself. And in the top of the base was there a round compass of a half a cubit high, and on the top of the base the stays thereof, and the borders thereof were of one piece therewith. And on the plates of the stays thereof, and on the borders thereof, he graved cherubim, lions, and palm trees, according to the space of each, with wreaths round about. After this manner he made the 10 bases. All of them had 1 casting, 1 measure, and 1 form. And he made 10 lavers of brass. 1 laver contained 40 baths, and every laver was 4 cubits, and upon every one of them 10 bases, 1 laver. And he set the bases, 5 on the right side of the house, and 5 on the left side of the house. And he set the sea on the right side of the house, eastward, toward the south. And Hiram made the pots, and the shovels, and the basins. So Hiram made an end of doing all the work that he worked for King Solomon in the house of the Lord. The 2 pillars and the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the top of the pillars, and the 2 networks to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the top of the pillars, and the 400 pomegranates for the 2 networks, 2 rows of pomegranates for each network to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were upon the top of the pillars, and the 10 bases, and the 10 lavers on the bases, and the 1 sea, and the 12 oxen under the sea, and the pots, and the shovels, and the basins, over even all the vessels which Hiram made for King Solomon in the house of the Lord were of burnished brass. In the plain of the Jordan did the king cast them, in the clay ground between the Succoth and Zerathon. And Solomon left all the vessels unweighed, because there were exceeding many. The weight of the brass could not be found out. And Solomon made all the vessels that were in the house of the Lord. The golden altar and the table whereupon the showbread was of gold, and the candlesticks, 5 on the right side and 5 on the left, before the sanctuary of the pure gold, and the flowers and the lamps and the tongs of gold, and the cups and the snuffers and the basins and the pans and the fire pans of pure gold, and the hinges, both for the doors of the inner house, the most holy place, and the doors of the house, that is, of the temple, of gold. Thus all the work that King Solomon wrought in the house of the Lord was finished, and Solomon brought in the things which David his father had dedicated, the silver and the gold and the vessels, and put them in the treasuries of the house of the Lord. Okay, let's go back to verse 1. Now we remember yesterday, last chapter, Solomon was working on the house of God, building the temple of God, and it says it's finished. Today, we're going to start in verse 1. Solomon's building his house, but we'll not just get shortly into the story of Solomon's house, and we're actually going to switch back and start describing the temple itself. And we're going to start in verse 1. And Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished all his house. So 13 years Solomon worked on his house. Now these years is once again a cycle of the greater light and its understanding. 13 now means there's disruption, there's disorder. Some people would describe it as apostasy, but there's disorder working. 2, for he built the house of the forest of Lebanon. The length thereof was 100 cubits, and the breadth thereof 50 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits, upon 4 rows of cedar pillars, with cedar beams upon the pillars. So now here we're describing this house that Solomon's built in the forest of Lebanon. Lebanon, once again, is this place that's made white for a witness. I describe it as this that was set up so you would understand the law at Mount Ebal. And the length of this house is 100 cubits. Now, the length is going to tell us how long it's going to last, and it's going to last until judgment comes. And this is when the truth is exposed and God does judge. And the breadth of it now is 50 cubits, because it's designed to grace of the law, and the height of it now is 30 cubits, because this is what it's made for, is to be dedicated. And upon 4 rows of cedar pillars. Now these cedar, once again, are trees that offer shade. They're a tree, they're evergreen. And it sits on 4 rows. These 4 is the work. 4 is the work, with cedar beams upon the pillars. And these cedar beams, once again now, so we got 4 rows of posts with cedar beams laying across the posts. And it was covered with cedar above upon the side chambers, lay on 40 and 5 pillars, 15 in a row. So the house is covered all in cedar above, even on the side chambers, and it lays on 45 pillars. There's 15 in a row. So these 45 pillars, 40 is the probation, 5 is the grace of God. And we're going to notice there's 45 of these pillars, and there's 15 of them in a row. So there's 3 rows of 15. And there was beams in 3 rows, and light was over against light in 3 ranks. So these beams are set up now, and what we're basically describing is basically a timber frame structure, and it's built on posts sticking out of the ground. It doesn't have a stone foundation, but it stands on posts. And these lights, this light is the light that comes in through the beams, and we see that the light is against light in 3 ranks. So now the beams, these cedar beams, divide up, and they cast shadows into the inside of the house into 2 lines across the house, and this divides the light into 3 ranks across the house. And all the doors with their posts were square in the frame, and the light was over against light in 3 ranks. So once again now these doors are built right into the post, and it's all an equal measurement, so that the light still stays in its equal ranks. And this is the 3 ranks. 3 is complete. These ranks would be in order. 6, and he made the porch of pillars. The length thereof was 50 cubits, and the breadth thereof 30 cubits, and a porch before them, and pillars and thick beams before them. So he's got a porch out here, and it's got pillars that are on the front of the porch that go out, and big beams set across these porches, and big beams go back to the house and tie it all together It's a timber frame, and the length of this now is for grace until grace comes, and the breadth now is 30 cubits, for it's made now. It's used for dedicated thing, and we're going to find that out. We're going to find that out here in a minute. And it has these pillars before it and these thick beams. So this is all a porch that's on the side of the house. And he made the porch of the throne where he might judge, even the porch of judgment. And it was covered with cedar from the floor to the floor. So, and we'll see that this porch, he's got it all covered in cedar. That shows that which is evergreen, everlasting, ever shading. And he's made it now. Like I said, it was going to be for a dedicated thing, and we see that it is. He's made it for the porch of judgment. 8, and his house, where he might dwell in the other court, within the porch, was of the like work. He made also a house for Pharaoh's daughter, whom Solomon had taken to wife, like unto this porch. So, we'll see that Solomon builds himself a porch that's just like this one, and then he builds Pharaoh's daughter, does a porch just like this one as well. And Pharaoh's daughter, Pharaoh means the great house. Daughter represents that which come from him. Now, this feminine, it's going to be the teaching of man, that from man. 9, all these were of costly stones. Now we're going to switch subjects. See, we're done building Solomon's house. Now we're going to, because Solomon's house set on posts, see. Solomon's house didn't set on these stones. We're going to find out. This here's got thrown in here. Probably should have been in the last chapter, because what it is we're going to describe now. We're back to the house of God, and we're going to describe it. All these were costly stones, according to the measure of hewn stones, sawed with saws within and without, even from the foundation unto the coping, and so on, and so on the outside unto the great court. So now we're back at the house of God. Solomon's building it, and we're talking about these stones, these costly stones, these stones that will be costly in the end, because what they're made out of are these teachings of men, and these are hewn stones. These are stones that men have put their hands to, and they've sawed it with saws within and without. All the stones and all the things that they built this house with were built by the hands of men. 10. And the foundation was of costly stones, even great stones, stones of 10 cubits and stones of 8 cubits. And we're going to see now, this is the measurement of these stones. This 10 cubits, the law, and 8 cubits is a new beginning, because that's what's going to come from the law is this new beginning. Because twice did Moses bring the law down, and twice shall the law come and enforce. 11, and above were costly stones, above the measure of hewn stones, and cedar work. These hewn stones that they're talking about here, these costly stones, these stones that were made by men, these were stones that cost a lot of money to have made. And above them was cedar work. 12, and the great court round about had 3 rows of hewn stones, and a row of cedar beams, like as the inner court of the house of the Lord, and the court of the porch of the house. So, and we'll remember, as it was described in the last chapter, these 3 rows of stones around the house, with the cedar beam laid upon top, so it could receive now these rooms above and the roof. 13, and King Solomon sent and fetched Hiram out of Tyre. So now Solomon, he's went to Tyre, this rock, and he's got Hiram. And we're not talking about the king of Tyre, Hiram. We're talking about a different Hiram, and we're getting ready to find that out. 14, he was the son of a widow of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in brass, and he was filled with wisdom and understanding and skill to work all the works in brass. And he came to King Solomon and worked all his work. So now Solomon, he's sent to Tyre, and he's hired Hiram. Hiram means these are nobility, noble, those that made themselves a noble place. And he's been filled with all this wisdom and understanding and skill to work all manners of brass. And brass is a representation of this cold darkness. And he's come to Solomon now, and he's going to work all manners of brass for the temple. 15. Thus he fashioned the 2 pillars of brass of 18 cubits high each, and a line of 12 cubits did compass it. And so was the other pillar. Because we're going to make these 2 pillars now. God wants you to witness something, these 2 pillars. Because in Deuteronomy, God said, you shall not raise yourself up a pillar. But we're going to see that God is using this. God's prospering this. And because while God wants you to understand, he's going to build this now. There's never going to be another house built to God like unto this house. This thing is going to come to its epiphany, the height and the peak of everything. We'll find this out as we read the story. 16, and he made 2 capitals of molten brass to set upon the tops of the pillars. The height of the one capital was 5 cubits, and the height of the other capital was 5 cubits. So we're going to make these 2 pillars now, and they're going to be of brass, and they're going to be exactly equal in proportion. Now God wants you to witness these 2 capitals that's going to be made up here. They're made of molten brass. So they have been put in the fire and boiled, and they'll be formed up in the clay. And God wants you to understand now, this is all being made for the purpose of grace. 17, he also made nets of checker work and wreaths of chain work for the capitals, and which were upon the tops of the pillars, 7 for the one capital, and 7 for the other capital. So these capitals which go on top of these pillars, which finish the top of the pillar off, or otherwise it would just be a round post, they have a capital made on the top, which will take this post from being round to a square thing for support. Now, the tops of these, there are 7 works of checker work. Now, this nets of checker work is just what it says. It's a net. It appears to be this net, and it's turned sideways, so it appears to make squares, this checkers. And it had also now these wreaths, and we have seen this used in the Greeks and Roman designs, these wreaths that look like a chain that goes around, kind of drooping down as it goes around, which were upon the tops of the pillars. So now this is what it looks like on these capitals that go at the top of the pillars. 18, and there were 2 rows round about upon one network, and to cover the capitals that were upon the top of the pomegranates, and so did he for the other capital. Now, so he's going to make these 2 rows, and this is the network that goes around the top of the capital, as well as this is going to be a row of pomegranates that goes around the top of the capital. 19, and the capitals that were upon the top of the pillars in the porch were of a lily work 4 cubits. Now, these capitals that are on top of the pillars have got this lily effect to them, and that is what that is there is a curved droop hanging down around the capital. And I don't know if I actually describes it, but it's like a lip that hangs out around the capital. And it's 4 cubits, and this is going to be the work now. This is going to be the work of it, how it looks. And there were capitals above, also upon the 2 pillars, close by the belly, which was beside the network, and the pomegranates were 200 in rows round about upon each capital. And these are them 2 rows of pomegranates we are talking about. And there's 200 of them now. God wants you to witness this judgment, because these pomegranates are of a fruit-bearing tree. But they're not going to represent a fruit that is not of the law. And there's going to be 2 rows of these now around the top of these capitals. And he set up the pillars at the porch of the temple, and he set up the right pillar, and he called the name thereof Jachin, and set up the left pillar, and called the name thereof Boaz. And we're going to see now, Jachin, Achan means to establish, but we remember Achan back at Jericho. His name, Achan, means this troubler, the one who's going to cause trouble. And Achan is this that is established, and this is why it's established, because that's what it's going to cause. Boaz means, the meaning of Boaz is really unknown, but it's somewhere between this warning and running. 22, and upon the top of the pillars was lily work, so the work of the pillars is finished. And that this lily work was also this lip effect that was made upon it. And this is how the pillars were made. These two giant pillars of brass, they were about 27 feet tall, and they're about 18 feet around. They're huge brass pillars. 23, and he made this molten sea of 10 cubits from brim to brim, round in compass, and the height thereof was 5 cubits, and the line 30 cubits did compass it round about. So we got this molten sea, and what this is going to be is like a giant basin to fill up with water. And this sea is going to be huge, and this sea is going to represent the multitudes of people. And it's now across this sea from lip to lip is 10 cubits. 10 is the law, and it's the measurement of it. And that's from brim to brim. Round in compass, so it's round, and the height of it is 5 cubits is grace. So the height of it, and it's what it's made for, is for grace. And the line of it is 30 cubits did go around it. So now to go around it is 30 cubits, and this would be 3 times 10. It's not quite pi in calculation, but it is a rough guess, and it's 30 cubits. 30 is dedication, and this is to go around it would be the purpose that it was made for. It's made for a dedicated thing. And under the brim of it, round about, there were knops which did compass it for 10 cubits, compassing the sea round about. The knops were in 2 rows, cast when it was cast. So these 2 rows of knops, now there's around the lip, upper part of this big water basin, and these we see now that these knops are cast right into the casting, so they was carved into the clay when it was poured in there, and they go all the way around. And these knops now are what they are is an unopened flower, and the meaning of this means that it's getting ready to burst open, and that it will show the whole flower. So these knops are bringing forth to burst. And these 2 rows, and this is what God's wanting you to witness. 25, and it stood upon 12 oxen, 3 looking toward the north, and 3 looking toward the west, and 3 looking toward the south, and 3 looking toward the east. And the sea was set upon them above, and all the hinder parts were inward. And we're going to see now these 12. God wants you to understand these oxen, these that are used to pull, these that are used to plow, to work with. 3 were looking each direction, north, east, west, and south. 3, because they're going to take and carry now this to all the earth. This message was what it was all designed for, and this is the symbology of that, because this is the judgment of God that He's going to carry out in all the earth. 26, and it was hand breadth thick, and the brim thereof was wrought like the brim of a cup, like the flower of a lily. It held 2,000 baths. And once again, we're describing this little lip that goes around it. This is the brim that goes all the way around it, and it's as thick as your hand is wide. That's about 4 inches or 3.5. And it's got the look of a cup. And it's like the flower of a lily. It has a little lip that turns out on it. And it holds 2,000 baths of water. 2,000. Now, God wants you to witness His fulfillment of this word. This 2,000 baths. A bath is going to be a speculative measurement. Some are going to say it's about 9 gallons, and some are going to say it's about half as much. It's probably around 5 gallons or so, about as much as it would take to wash oneself. And this 2,000, we would see now that this would hold around 10,000 gallons of water. 29. And on the borders that were between the stays were lions, oxen, and cherubim, and upon it the stays it was in the like manner above, and beneath the lions and the oxen were wreaths of hanging work. So now around this we're going to find that in between places that stays where you would maybe put some staffs through to bear this up were these carvings now of lions and oxen and these cherubim around it. And every base had 4 brazen wheels and axles of brass, and the 4 feet thereof had undersetters. Beneath the laver were the undersetters molten with wreaths at the side of each. And what we're going to be talking about now is these 4 brazen wheels, and these 4 is this work now of brass, this cold darkness, and these wheels represent that rolls away like Gilgal. It's a rolling, and they're on these axles of brass. So the whole thing itself is made of brass. It's a brazen work. It's dedicated, and it's meant for one thing. And these 4 feet is the work which it stands on. And they've got these undersetters. So we got these 4 legs. They look like legs coming down, but they're called undersetters. Now what an undersetter is like a fender well or a skirt across the tire, where the tire sits up in it, partially hidden and partially exposed. And these little skirts, they look like a wreath work that goes around them. 31, and the mouth of it within the crown and above was a cubit high, and the mouth thereof was round after the work of the pedestal, a cubit and a half, and also upon the mouth of it were gravings, and their borders were 4 square, not round. And what this is trying to say is, now this is this under part that it's got is square, but upon it now is a lip of about 6 inches high, 8 inches tall, that goes all the way around it, that sits on top where this a basin's going to sit, and it's round, but the bottom around where the carvings are is square. 32, and the 4 wheels were underneath the borders, and the axle trees of the wheels were in the base, and the height of the wheel was a cubit and a half a cubit. So these wheels are made up in there. The axle's made into the base of it, and these wheels set up inside, half exposed, half unexposed, by the skirt that runs across there. And we're going to see the wheel. This wheel, this thing that turns, is a cubit and a half. And this is going to be about 24 inches or so, roughly. 33. And the work of the wheels was like the work of a chariot wheel. Their axle trees and their felloes and their spokes and their naves were all molten. So we'll see now that it looks like a chariot wheel. It's got axles or spokes. It's got an axle and it's got spokes and a center hub. And they're all made of molten brass. And there were 4 undersetters at the 4 corners of each base. The undersetters thereof were of one piece with the base itself. So these little skirts are made right into the base. When it was made, they were made in the 4 corners of it. Now there's one on all 4 corners to hide the 4 wheels. It sets on 4 wheels. And the top of the base was there a round compass of a half a cubit high. On the top of the base, the stays thereof and the borders thereof were of one piece therewith. And this would be that which the little smaller basins are going to be set upon. And it's just, once again, explaining this little border that goes around, that sits on top of this square piece of brass work. And on the plates of the stage thereof, and on the borders thereof, he graved cherubim, lions, and palm trees, according to the space of each, with wreaths round about. And these wreaths, once again, are those little decorative, drooping wreath work that we see. And what we're describing is a very ornate piece of engraving with these cherubim and these lions and these palm trees about it. Describing now in a very detailed manner these lower pedestal type things that these basins could be moved around on and filled up with water. After this manner, 37, he made the 10 bases. All of them had one casting, one measure, and one form. So now there's 10 of these bases that he's made, and all of them look exactly alike. These 10 bases. Now 10's the law, and bases is a foundation that which was made or established to sit it on. And they are all of one measure, this beginning, and this one casting, the one form. They all look alike. 38, and he made 10 lavers of brass, or 10 bowls, or giant cups, these things that would hold water. They're all made of brass. One laver contained 40 baths. 40 is probation. And this is the amount of water that these would hold. Roughly about 200 gallons. And every laver was 4 cubits. And this was the measurement of it. And this is because they're for the work of God. And upon every one of them, 10 bases, 1 laver. So for every base he made a laver, a bowl, and it would hold about 40 baths of water. 39, and he set the bases, 5 on the right side of the house and 5 on the left side of the house. And he set the sea on the right side of the house, eastward toward the south. So these 5 basins now that he's made for water, and these lavers, these bowls that sit on top each of them, he sets 5 on one side of the house and 5 on the other side of the house, because they're going to show the grace of God, 5 on each side. But this giant sea now, he sets it to the right, because this is what the overall work of God is to save the earth, to save everybody. See, he's not chosen one person and just going to save them. He's chose one person or one peoples to use to save everybody from sin, from the horridness that sin causes, from people who, when we go astray from the law of God, all we do is wreak perversion and nastiness into the earth, into the world, for everybody else. And when people see this, they think they can do likewise. And God doesn't want this going on. There's so much that life has to offer. And if we seek the good things in life, we find the good things. If we seek out the evil things now, we'll find just that. 40. And Hiram made the pots and the shovels and the basins. So Hiram made an end of doing all the work that he worked for King Solomon in the house of the Lord. And this was it. He had made all the basins. He had made the sea. He had made these big capitals. We're going to find out he makes a lot of the utensils that are used in these ceremonies that for God. Now, all of this God commanded to not be done, but God is going to prosper this, and God's going to bend with it a little bit to show you something. God's trying to teach us something. All these things God commanded. He said, you shall not worship me after the manner that they have worshipped their God. For after every abomination now have they done. And we'll see now, when you try to do these ceremonies and have this type of a worship before God, you're going to mess up and you're not going to succeed, because God seeks to be worshipped 100% in obedience of the law. 41, the 2 pillars and the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the top of the pillars, the 2 networks to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the top of the pillars. Witness the pillars. Witness these bowls, these capitals on top of the pillars. Witness now this networks, this webbing that cover these two bowls of the capitals and the tops of these pillars. Witness now, because all this is made of brass, cold darkness. 42, and the 400 pomegranates for the two networks, the two rows of pomegranates for each network, to cover the two bowls of the capitals that were upon the top of the pillars. And these 400 now, this is for the work of judgment, is these pomegranates, these fruits, that's not of that which God gave you to partake of. These pomegranates represent that fruit outside the fruit trees of the garden. For the two networks, these two webbings, witness now this webbings, and these two rows of these pomegranates, the witness of this tree, for each network to cover the two bowls of the capitals that were upon the top of the pillar. God wants you to witness now these two pillars. These pillars they're setting up. And the 10 bases, and the 10 lavers on the bases. These bases, these foundations, these laws that were established. And this law of the waters, these law of the earth that was given. 44, and the one sea and the 12 oxen under the sea. And this one sea is all the peoples of the earth, and these 12 are each nation of Israel that it was sent to carry this message out, to use for an example now, to do the work of God. 45, and the pots and the shovels and the basins and all their vessels, which Hiram made for the king Solomon in the house of the Lord, were of burnished brass. So all this work he made, all the stuff that Hiram come and made, we know Hiram was a great artificer of brass, were made of brass. 46, in the plain of the Jordan did the king cast them, in the clay ground between Succoth and Zerathon. And now we'll find out this plain and down in the Jordan is just off the side of the Jordan, where the Jordan would often overflow, probably, and this would be a area where the silt had been deposited over many years, and it was an area of clay. And there they dug these holes out, and they would make the castings right there into the earth itself. And it's Succoth. It's this booths, place of booths. And the place of booths is where everybody shows that when they come up out of Israel, they lived in these booths because they was waiting for the deliverance of God. And basically, that's where everybody really should be right now. And Zarethan is this place of piercing, this place of like a fortress has been pierced. And this is where they cast this stuff between these two places. And Solomon left all the vessels unweighed, because there was exceedingly many, and the weight of the brass could not be found out. So now Solomon, they don't even bother weighing all this stuff, because there's so much brass used that it cannot be found out. And Solomon made all the vessels that were in the house of the Lord. The golden altar, the table whereon the showbread was of gold. And because the gold represents that which belongs to God anyway. The gold always represents that which belongs to God. And we're going to find the whole place now of the inner area was made of gold. And the candlesticks, 5 on the right side and 5 on the left, before the sanctuary of pure gold, and the flowers and the lamps and the tongs of gold. So everything was made of gold. These lamps, 5 on this side and 5 on that side. 5, grace. 10 in all, law of God. Grace through the law. That's the whole teaching of all of it. 50, and the cups and the snuffers and the basins and the pans and the fire pans of pure gold. And the hinges both for the doors of the inner house, the most holy place, and for the doors of the house, that is, of the temple, of gold. So these hinges of gold, all these, the snuffers, the basins, pans, fire pans, all of pure gold. That which belongs to God anyway. This is that which is going to be used for the work of God, that which belongs to him anyway. 51. Thus all the work that King Solomon worked in the house of the Lord was finished, and Solomon brought in the things which David his father had dedicated, the silver and the gold and the vessels, and put them in the treasuries of the house of the Lord. And so now Solomon's done. He's pretty well done building this house of God. And we'll see that it is magnificent. It is magnificent. It is, the sanctuary's pure gold, the inner court, all of it covered in gold. This place of the innermost holy just covered inside and out with gold. And sitting with there through the doors is this two angels of gold covering the ark. This is a magnificent place. There is no other house of God built like this anywhere in the world. God has brought it now to the height of its heights. We're going to find this out. All right, we're going to move on to chapter 8.